Welcome to the Personality Typing Summit, a free online event featuring a wide range of personality and profiling experts, sharing wisdom and practices to reveal your unique gifts, patterns, and life path. Share this event with your friends and family, and come join us on Facebook at The Shift Network. And now your host, Ben Hart.
Well, welcome everyone. So happy to be with you today for our session on strengths. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Darren Virassammy. As Darren's bio says, you have the power to create the workplace culture that you've envisioned, where people are engaged, valued for being valuable, and play to their strengths. 34-strong co-founder Darren Virassammy leads the team that serves alongside you to make that a sustainable reality, whether you lead an army of one or large organization. Darren, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome.
Hey, great to be here, Ben. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So as your bio just stated, or if it's not obvious for folks, so Darren works with organizations doing strength-based work, helping people become more actualized in their work, more engaged, and just create more cohesive cultures and more actualized cultures. And so I'm excited to talk about that with you today, Darren. But we'd love to start just with kind of the personal side to this. A lot of people are coming to this summit looking for more understanding about who they are, what makes them tick, how they can best leverage their talents and gifts. So to begin there, just what is a strengths-based approach to human development? What is this work about?
So I imagine many of our friends that are listening in here, Ben, they don't get out of bed every day, wake up and say, you know what, world, today is going to be the day that I'm going to be as mediocre or below average as possible, right? Ben, does that summarize how you wake up? Or if you could pick between mediocrity and excellence, which would you choose?
Definitely excellence is the way I'd choose to go.
Right? Excellence, right? When we think about this process, we want to aim for excellence, but the whole point here is how do we get to excellence if we're focused on a weakness? And our traditional approach to human development, again, whether we're an army of one or whether we're leading a large team within an organization, is simply this. Our traditional approach is we seem to think that our best pathway to human growth is by identifying all the areas that we're weak at and then focusing on developing those areas. Here's the thing. The real shift is what happens if we are able to identify the areas that we have natural talents, the areas that we are strong, and invest in those areas and develop those. That's where our true genius is. That's where our true capacity for excellence is. And it's not a function of we ignore our areas of weakness. Actually, through really becoming strengths-based, we have to know who we are and who we aren't, and own both of those things equally, because it gives us an opportunity then to manage around our weakness. And where we might be weak, somebody else on our team or somebody else that we partner with might be a great opportunity for them to shine. And collectively, we can do great things. It summarizes in this. The last thing I'll say is this African proverb, right? It's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others.
That's great, Darren. So in terms of that piece, a lot of different schools of thought really articulate or highlight weaknesses and say we should work on our weaknesses and then become a more balanced person. And I hear you saying, we manage our weaknesses. And I'm curious if you could speak a bit more to that. Like, how do you recommend people relate to the strengths they have and the weaknesses they have? And how do we find the right way to, move forward holding all of that?
Yeah, there's many, many great tools that are out there. So the first point of, again, the schools of thought of the weakness fixation. Look, if we want to prevent failure, and that's your only goal in life or in business, you can focus on your weakness, and we can definitely get to a point where we succeed at preventing failure. But if we actually want to aim for excellence, that's why we start off with the mediocrity versus excellence. It's just shifting the goal of what it is that we're targeting. When we're aiming for excellence, we've got to start with our talent. And talent's not defined by, hey, how good of a gardener are you? How good of a musician are you or a painter? Talent, through the lens of the Strengths Finder, is defined as our natural patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that can be productively applied. There's many, many great assessments that are out there. You got, standard ones that a lot of people know, DISC, Myers-Briggs, some of those, to just kind of name those quickly. The Strengths Finder is different in the context of it's actually measuring people's talents, it is measuring their unique patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that can be productively applied. So that's a great place for people to start, in being able to identify what their natural talents are and how they can develop those into strengths, but also become aware as to how those talents can help us or hinder us. They can be our greatest assets and our greatest liabilities.
That's great. So in terms of the StrengthsFinder assessment, could you speak a bit to, how do people, this is a test that you have folks take, and I see the 34 strong in the back. I know it comes out with 34 potential strengths. And so you can just speak a bit to, as folks who may choose to go on and take this assessment, what they'd be gleaning about themselves, kind of how that works in terms of themes or rankings, or just what that information, how it comes to folks that you recommend engaging with it.
Absolutely. So I'll just give you the quick context on it. Dr. Donald Clifton asked the question many decades ago of what will happen when we focus on what's right with people instead of fixating on what's wrong with them. That launched him into a decade worth of research where he studied almost 2 million people to identify how talent exists in humans in a ranked order. And what ended up emerging was there was these 34 buckets of talent, these 34 themes of talent that exist in all humans in a ranked order. And that was actually how we came up with the name 34 Strong. It was along the lines of, hey, look, we all have very, very differing talents, very, very differing strengths, but they're all created equal in the context. They're all abilities for us to aim for our unique excellence, our contributions that we can make. So we can glean elements in taking the StrengthsFinder assessment. You can go to Gallup and take that through them, and it will give you the insights of your ranked order from 1 through 34. Now, here's a fascinating part. The likelihood of somebody having their top 10 in the exact same order as you is 1 in 6 billion, Ben. So your results are almost as unique as your fingerprint. And the personalized insights, the combinations, maybe you and I share a common theme, achiever. Maybe we both like to go get a lot of things done, a lot of elements crossed off our list and completed. But our other strengths could be different. And that's going to guide the way in which our achiever theme even shows up and how it actually plays and manifests itself in the work that we will do and the contributions that we'll do in our work and in our life around that lens.
Fascinating. So do you consider the StrengthsFinder assessment, the tool, a personality profiling system? Or if not, how do you think about it in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it does often get lumped in as a personality profile assessment, a personality profile tool. It's actually fundamentally not that. With the work that Dr. Clifton did, it is merely a talent measurement tool. All it's doing is measuring the presence of talent. And truth be told, the name StrengthsFinder is a little bit, can be a little bit off-putting. Because here's the thing, it's just telling you that these talents are present. It's not actually telling us if they're being used effectively or not, if they're actually showing up and being utilized to a place of strengths. We can overuse our talents to a place to where they're not helpful, to where they actually exhaust us personally. We can use our strengths and burn ourselves out. We can also use them to the point of where they're not being as helpful to the teams that we're on. So it's a function of saying you have these talents, but it is a function of calibrating them in a way that can be utilized really, really effectively, and then thinking about ways that we can align them on teams as we're going forward and putting it together.
Interesting. So I'm curious, Darren, just on a personal level for you, were there any defining moments that kind of brought you to this strengths-based approach to work, or once you had your assessment and began to kind of dig into it more, anything that really hit you that grounded this, this work for you more deeply?
Yeah, I'll take you back to July of 2012. I was driving in the morning. I live in Sacramento, and I believe you're in the Marin area. I was driving into Marin, actually into the San Anselmo area for an employer that I work with. I used to be in commercial construction for many, many years. And I was a senior project manager. I'm driving in July, and my daughter is a week old. It's my first day back at work. And I'm going to this job that I really don't love. In fact, I'd gotten really good, Ben, at something that I I didn't really love. I think a lot of people go through this, and there was a high level of toxicity in the workplace culture that was there, and I was becoming disengaged, and I felt the pain of what that was like. So this is my first day back to work, and it's about, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning, because I live in Sacramento and I'm driving there. I'm coming across a bridge, the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, that takes you in. My tire blows out on my truck. I swerve just a few feet in front of a big rig and somehow narrowly miss getting smashed by a big rig, find my way over to the shoulder, and I'm just a few miles away from my office. That was a pretty powerful wake-up call and warning sign, because here I was going back to work. My daughter's at home, in her first week of life, and almost lost everything in just for a job that I didn't really enjoy, that I didn't really think about. Now, here's the thing: the fog of that, because I was in that space, being a little sleep deprived in these different elements, I didn't really connect the dots at that time. 4 months later, we were in Hawaii. My daughter was sitting in my lap. My daughter Kira was sitting in my lap. She's now about 4 months old. She looks up at me. We're on the big island of Hawaii, just relishing being a dad. And she laughs out loud for the first time in her life. And I was just blown away. I was completely energized by this experience, Ben, and I was completely terrified. Because when she did that, she reminded me of something that took me back to that moment 4 months previously. And it awakened something through the lens of potential. In her, I saw potential. I saw somebody that was going to walk, talk, do all these things. And then I had to ask, well, what happened to yours? And what kind of parent are you going to be if you're not willing to step into your potential that you once had? If you just follow this script, if you believe that you have these strengths and these elements. I had taken the Strengths Finder a couple months before, and I thought it completely resonated. And like many great things that resonate, you take it and you put it on your shelf and you say, someday maybe I'm going to do something with that. The gift of Kira laughing out loud at that someday maybe came as soon as I came back from that trip. I shifted my whole focus, and within a month and a half, 2 months of that trip, I actually ended up meeting my business partner, Brandon Miller. He was going through becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach at the time. We both had a similar vision for the connection that we wanted to make with humanity on shifting workplace culture and what that would do for shifting children's experiences, family experiences, because they're going to work and feeling a sense of fulfillment and contribution. And the rest is history. That's kind of where it started. So those two experiences were pretty powerful and really opened up the door to reconnecting with my own potential.
It's really beautiful, Darren. Well, thank you for saying yes to yourself, and the way fatherhood initiated you into this next stage. It's really beautiful. And I'm curious, as you then step more deeply into this work, just because what I'd love to do is just begin to ground kind of the teachings of the Strengths Finder work into more specifics, so people, as they take the assessment, potentially can have a sense of, okay, this is how I might use this. Because as you were saying, we can get a sense of, okay, those are my strengths, but we might not actually be actualizing them or using them correctly necessarily. And so for you, I'm curious, as you took your test and then began to engage with the work more deeply, were there any particular strengths that, as you contemplated them more deeply, that you found new ways to engage with them, new ways to bring them forward into your work in the world?
Oh, yeah. I can tell you, so a lot of my strengths within the 34 themes, what they've also done, Gallup has been able to do this, they've broken it down into these four domains, if you will. So there's the 4 domains of our strengths. And the 4 domains were broken down based on the levels of what they would naturally contribute and what the needs would be. So one of those, the 4 domains are executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And all 34 of those themes fall into one of those respective domains. If you look at my top 10, 5 of my top 10 are executing based. So I love the process of getting things completed, getting things done, crossed off the list, and there we go. So one of the things that was fascinating for me in my early journey through strengths as we were launching 34 Strong, I would set out every day, Ben, and I would set up my to-do list, and I'd say, I got to get this done. I got to get that done. I got to get all these things completed. And what started to happen is we were getting momentum with 34 Strong. A lot of that was happening. Now, here's where the strengths can cut both ways. My talents, because they were so doing focused, it was easy for me late in the day to come to a place where I'd say, you know what? I'll just do one more task because I got that energy from crossing one more thing off the list. And I get that complete, I get one more thing done. Well, guess who was paying the price? Who was paying the tax on that? My family, my friends, relationships, different things like that. Because it was always, I could do one more thing. But you know what I couldn't do? I couldn't get that time back with my family, with my daughter at the time. That's all we had was just my daughter at the time as the company was getting launched. So the way that I used my talents on a personal level, as opposed to just setting the metrics for all these things that we have to get completed on our list, I had to start my day when I was putting my to-do list together. I'd actually put family time on my list. It was the first item on my list. And as crazy as that might sound to some of our listeners that you had to put family time on your to-do list, wow, should we really be listening to you? Here's the thing. I couldn't run from my talents, Ben. I couldn't run from the fact that naturally I viewed the world through different lists and different elements. And in putting those priorities on my to-do list, it's almost like it gave me permission to spend that time with them because I started framing it as something that qualified as getting done that actually really mattered. I'm happy to report that many years later, I don't need to put that on my to-do list, but it's gotten me to a place of where I can really prioritize what's going on that list, not just getting things done for the sake of getting things done. We live in execution-centric cultures, whether you're in a large organization or if you're a solopreneur, we can always feel like we got to produce more, we got to do this, we got to do that. And for me, it was that recalibration of asking what's the return on time invested, what's the value of that. Those are the things that I want to get done. And that was a huge reframe for me and gave me a much better way to utilize my talents and even who I'd connect with, the complementary partnerships I'd create.
Oh, that's great, Darren. Thanks for sharing the specifics of that. I really appreciate it, and it's a beautiful example. Yeah, and it connects me to kind of the art and the science of working with our strengths, and that there's all this data that we'll get, and then it really is about the nuance of how does that, how do our different strengths work together, and how do we bring that into our day-to-day lives. Yeah, it's fascinating. So I'm curious, I know that you have an exercise that we could lead people through, and what I'd love to do in this time together is make sure that folks walk away with some insight into who they are, what their strengths might be, and how they can step forward into this work more deeply. So I'm curious if we could go into the worksheet you provided. And for those of you listening, underneath this session, there's a downloadable link there where you can download this and we can begin to walk you through it.
Absolutely. So the download that everybody will get access to, Ben, is what we call the triple G. And the triple G is simply this. We've all got areas of grind, we've got areas of greatness, and then we have areas of genius. Our exercise that we have provided here gives all of the listeners a chance to go through and take inventory of what are the things they're doing in their business, in their life, and listing those respective activities and identifying them as either a grind, a greatness, or a genius. And here's the thing. So the things that are in the grind zone, these are the things that maybe you'd rather go try and attempt running through a brick wall than doing, or just the thought of actually doing them causes you major heartache, causes you major issues. In fact, you probably spend more time wallowing about thinking about how dreadful it's going to be to do than the time it actually takes to do it. Because there's such cognitive dissonance in that. And maybe you've had practice with doing it years and years and years, but you still don't like it. That's something that would be in your grind zone. That would be something that would be in your grind zone. The greatness, these are things that you do pretty fluidly. You've gotten really, really good at them. There's a level of enjoyment. You're solid at them. You can perform, and there's a high level of, high caliber of performance that you can deliver on this. These, and I want to be clear, this doesn't have to just be tasks that you're doing. It could be, hey, I'm really good at going into the room, making connections with people. I'm really good at spending time taking a walk and thinking and connecting the dots to the bigger picture. These are all things that kind of get swept under the carpet for us. Sometimes in our day-to-day work, in the day-to-day lives that we're living, that we undervalue. Maybe you are a big thinker. That could be something that could be a greatness zone or a genius zone, and maybe it comes to you at completely, quote unquote, unconventional times. So that's an example of the greatness. That's what we can think of. Now, our genius areas, Ben, these are the areas where it's almost like you don't even think. In fact, when somebody comes up to you and said, how did you connect those dots so quickly? How do you step into a room with 100 strangers and within 10 minutes, you know everybody and you've connected and you just seem to light up when you do that? And if your response to that is, oh, anybody can do that, and I'm one of those anybodies, and I feel like, throwing up every time I have to think of that or doing that, clearly anybody can't do that. A lot of times when we're in these spaces where we're catching ourselves and it seems so simple that we don't even value it, it's so easy, those are our areas of genius. And something like being able to go out and break the ice. There's a StrengthsFinder theme called WOO. It stands for winning others over. That talent has an unbelievable knack for stepping into a room with perfect strangers, going through and making those types of connections. So this exercise is a chance for people to take inventory of where they are on their own, whether they've taken the StrengthsFinder or not, and just start kind of thinking through that. Now, if they have taken the StrengthsFinder, this will just accelerate it more. The other caveat that I want to share with people is if you do have a team, or maybe you have people that you're working with, partners, contracting, maybe you have employees. This is a great exercise for you to do with each of your team members that you work through. They can go through it, and it's actually utilized. Many of our clients, larger organizations, smaller organizations, this has become kind of like a monthly check-in process. Because if you're finding that a lot of your employees are in the grind zone, or a lot of who you work with is in the grind zone, you're going to have a difficult time getting them to be highly engaged in their work. Now, if they're in the grind zone, but they're starting to move to spending more time in greatness, genius, maybe there's a reallocation of work that can take place. This is where we have opportunities to rise up, strengthen the bonds on the team, and open that door. So it's a great one-on-one tool as well outside of that deeper dive for self.
That's great, Darren. I have a question about this piece around genius, because one thing we're wanting to do in this summit is really reflect back to folks that each of us is a genius in our own right, in our own beautiful way. And I think we have so many cultural connotations about kind of seeing genius as certain people with very singular talents. And I'm curious, I think one thing you mentioned there is how easy it is sometimes for us to see the genius in others, but have no real sense of what it is ourselves because it feels so easy. But I'd just love to have you speak a bit to, what you've seen in folks as they connect more to their strengths, as they are able to recognize their genius, both the ease with which that could happen potentially, or just the journey you see people go on as we begin to really understand ourselves and step into who we can be most easily in our genius.
Yeah, I want to take you to a quote from one of my favorite bass players on the planet. So I moonlight as an electric bass player outside of this. I've been playing for several years, but there's a bass player. His name's Marcus Miller, incredible jazz bassist, and he planted a seed from a very, very young age in me that I think it's still blossoming. It was just a simple quote, and it was in his approach to music and in life. But it was simply this: at some point, whether in music or in life, it's great to study the practices of others, great to learn how to emulate them. But at some point, you just got to do you, because nobody can do you better than you can do you. And that permeates in the space of exactly what we're talking about with strengths. It's embracing exactly who we are and who we're not. It's being confidently vulnerable. It's this notion of being confident in where we shine and confident in where we're blind. So some of the epiphanies that have taken place have been this notion of being open to accepting those pieces, starting to understand the why behind how our actions are perceived, starting to understand the fact that somebody doesn't see things through the same lens as you is actually great, because perhaps they're covering a blind spot of yours, that you actually have alignment towards the outcome, the goal that you're seeking to get to, the impact that you're seeking to make, but you have different unique ways in which you can contribute. So it's actually gotten many of the teams that we've worked with, and we've even seen it when, it's always when somebody asks, oh my gosh, that's my wife, or that's my husband, they're that, and I must drive them crazy. It goes home. It transcends that relationship with that spouse, with that kid. That's where we can have pretty powerful impact. The final point I'll make on this is what happens then when we can move from frustration to fascination. What happens when we can take the things that are frustrating us and actually say, I'd like to be fascinated by those things, and ask the question of, if somebody's doing something completely different, I'm not tracking with where they're at, I can ask them if they've taken the Strengths Finder, or if I'm aware of their talents. Hey, you know what? I'm not clicking right now. I'm not understanding where you're going with this, why this is relevant, but I would like to understand which of your talents are being used, how your talents are playing out in this scenario, and what are you seeing as the vision? Talent alignment, when we're focusing on strengths, is a way for us to kind of get curious, stay fascinated, and actually keep us connected, bring us back together when those moments and those bumps arise in relationships. Doesn't eliminate it, but it gives us a path to reset and to validate.
Nice, Darren. That's great. And that leads very easily into, where I was wanting to go with you next, around the work that you do with teams. And I love how you use the example there of, even in kind of a relationship or a marriage, seeing it as a team and seeing the strengths and seeing the blind spots and all of that. And so I'm curious, with, the creation of healthy culture, whether it's the healthy culture of a romantic relationship or the healthy culture of a giant corporation, how do you see us personally understanding our strengths, us understanding the strengths of others, and the way that can create different conversations? Or just what do you see the unfolding of that looking like as we move from, disharmony or lack of health to health and higher functioning? And you're obviously speaking about a bit of that.
I see this many different ways. So big picture, there's a shift that's taking place. I mean, that's the whole point of what this whole summit is about here, right? There's a major shift that's taking place in the lens of employees are just starting to understand, I don't have to tolerate the process of old, the process of command and control style leadership, of showing up to work and being fearful. And there's more transparency that's taking place on that side, on both elements of when we think about this from a brand, right? Many organizations have focused on their external facing brand, but there's the internal facing brand of, how are your employees feeling when they're at work? What's their environment like when it's here? If the environment's not right and the culture's not right, we're not going to get to the results that we want to get to with the clients that we're serving. I always say this here, if you squeeze a group of tomatoes, you wouldn't be upset that it didn't give you orange juice. And that's the whole point in culture. Culture is the lifeblood of the environment, of how we're going to create the results, the impact that we want to have with our clients that we serve. So there's that demand for that. How it's rolling down and how it's rolling through and permeating organizations. As you know, I'm a big fan, of 15.5. 15.5, I think they're the crew that connected us. There's Shane Metcalf, he's their chief culture officer, is a good friend of mine, and David Miz has connected us. I think the work that has been happening that they're doing, they focus on the micro conversations that happen on a weekly basis. That is the foundation of culture. Strengths is not the end all be all. The real piece for culture is creating those cultures where people can be engaged, where they can show up and be valued for being valuable. Strengths gives us a way to understand the lens, not only through how we're looking at the world, but also how others are looking at the world, and giving us a chance to reset the conversations around that and think through that. When we think from those pieces to the work that 15.5 is doing in the lens of creating employee engagement and in kind of driving that process forward, culture is simply this. Culture isn't built in a single day, team building, rah, high fives. That's not how it happens. It's built in one conversation, one email, one interaction, one pause in the middle of the day, in the experience, the environment that people have, so they can show up to thrive, not to survive. And that's a question we have to ask. Do we want to create, no matter how big your organization is or your team is, do you want to create a place where people feel like they can thrive, or do you want to create a place where people can survive? Culture comes either by intention or by accident. It's a choice, but it's going to happen either way. You're much better off designing that.
Beautiful. Well said, Darren. I really appreciate that. And yeah, mentioning our friends at 15.5, definitely those of you who are part of organizations, if you want to have take your culture to the next level, have meaningful conversations, definitely check out 15.5, as well as Darren's organization, 34 Strong, to bring the strengths-based approach into your culture. Well, Darren, unfortunately, sadly, we only have a little bit of time together, so I feel like we could go on and on around this. There's a lot to talk about, but yeah, I want to just bring it to the final question, which is really just putting it back to you. What's the final thing you'd like to leave folks with as they contemplate everything you've shared today? What's a final insight, thought, inspiration that you'd love to have people move into the rest of their day with?
Just remember this. How can we aim high? How can we aim for excellence if we're focusing on our weakness? That's where I'd like to leave it. It's those elements, and the more that we can embrace where we really are excellent and where others can shine, the more that we can actually figure out who the complementary partners are that we need in our life to really create the impact that each person uniquely has, each person's unique genius that you talked about, so that they can contribute and really be that massive impact that we're all capable of.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much, Darren. Absolute pleasure getting to know you, having you here for the interview. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate being on here, and thanks for doing this work. This is what matters, and this is what's going to create the tipping points for humanity on a large scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a very strong shared belief in the potential of each individual and the potential for humanity. So yes, let's keep moving forward all together. And thank you to all the listeners out there. So I highly recommend checking out Darren's organization at 34strong.com, as well as checking out the Clifton, the Gallup Strengths Assessment. It's a much more in-depth assessment than a lot of the profiling systems that we're profiling here. So it's a paid assessment, but it goes very deep, and I highly recommend it if you're drawn to go deeper into this work. So again, you can check out Darren at 34strong.com. And thank you so much for being a part of the session today. We'll see you on the next one. Have a beautiful rest of your day. And thanks again, Darren.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you for joining us for the Personality Typing Summit, brought to you by the Shift Network. To learn more, visit personalitytypingsummit.com. To join our global community of people awakening to their divine humanity and taking inspired action, visit theshiftnetwork.com. Thank you again for gathering with us and for sharing this transformative path with your friends and family.